Everyone in the interview room laughed at Sarah Miller. With her plain clothes and modest appearance, they thought she didn't belong in their fancy office. Little did they know that within 24 hours, she would become their boss with the power to fire them all. Before you watch the complete video, please comment down from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe. The 30th floor of Parker Industries headquarters in New York was filled with glass walls and amazing views of the city. Sarah sat quietly in the meeting room, holding her old leather bag on her lap. At 32 years old, she kept a calm look despite wearing a simple blue jacket and comfortable shoes. Her resume showed great achievements. She started a successful green business and graduated top of her class from Harvard Business School. But none of that seemed important to the three people sitting across from her, who kept giving each other knowing looks. Jessica Taylor, the perfectly dressed human resources director, tapped her fingers on the glass table. Her designer outfit probably cost more than everything Sarah owned. "So, Miss Miller," she said with a mocking voice, "you really think your background makes you qualified for a management job at Parker Industries?" The way she said background made it clear she found the idea ridiculous. Next to her, two other executives kept straight faces. The one woman, Lisa Wang from Talent Development, seemed uncomfortable with Jessica's tone. Sarah sat up straight and answered confidently, "Yes, I believe my record speaks for itself. GreenPath grew to be worth $40 million while I was in charge. We created practices that helped both the environment and profits." Her voice was soft but carried natural authority that briefly silenced the room. She held her old leather bag a little tighter. It was a gift from her father years ago. Jessica shared a look with Thomas Brooks, the company's finance director, who sat beside her with a permanent frown. "And yet," Jessica continued, "GreenPath failed to get its final funding last year, correct? That's quite a big failure, wouldn't you say?" Her smile showed perfect teeth but no warmth. The comment hurt, but Sarah stayed calm. "Yes, we faced problems during the economic downturn, but I learned valuable lessons about staying strong and adapting. These lessons would help me in any leadership role." She met Jessica's eyes steadily, refusing to be intimidated. Jessica laughed without any humor. "Miss Miller, Parker Industries is a Fortune 500 company with a history spanning 3 generations. We set global standards." She waved dismissively at Sarah's clothes. "Honestly, we need someone with more polish, someone who understands our world. You're simply not Parker material." With that, Jessica tossed Sarah's resume onto the table like it was trash. "We'll be in touch," she said, already looking at her phone to show the interview was over. At the far end of the table, Lisa Wang looked down at her notes, refusing to meet Sarah's eyes. Sarah slowly gathered her resume, carefully putting it back in her worn bag. Just as she was about to stand, the conference room door opened. Robert Parker, the company's chief executive officer, walked in purposefully. Tall and distinguished in his early 60s with silver hair and sharp blue eyes, he commanded attention immediately. His eyes swept the room before landing on Sarah. His businesslike expression suddenly changed to surprise and recognition. No one was prepared for what happened next. "Sarah?" Robert's strong voice filled the room as he stared at her in disbelief. The atmosphere in the conference room instantly changed from dismissive to confused. Jessica Taylor's smug expression faltered as she looked between the CEO and the woman she had just humiliated. Robert walked across the room, ignoring the executive team entirely. "I wasn't expecting to see you here today," he said warmly, extending his hand to Sarah, who stood to meet him. "Hello, Robert," Sarah replied quietly, a small smile appearing for the first time since she'd entered the building. The exchange left the interview panel frozen in their seats, struggling to understand the sudden power shift. Thomas Brooks' frown deepened as he watched them, his knuckles whitening as he gripped his chair. Jessica recovered first, putting on a professional smile as she stood. "Mr. Parker, we were just finishing our interview with Miss Miller. I didn't know you two knew each other." Robert turned to face his executive team, keeping one hand on Sarah's shoulder supportively. "Know each other," he repeated with a short laugh. "I've known Sarah her entire life. William Miller was not just my mentor but my closest friend for over 30 years. He looked directly at Jessica, whose perfect smile was starting to crack. So I'm surprised you didn't recognize our founder's daughter, especially since she owns 51% of this company as of last week." The news hit the silent conference room like a bomb. Jessica's face turned so pale it looked like someone had pulled a plug. Thomas Brooks' expression hardened into barely controlled anger as he realized what this meant. Lisa Wang's eyes widened in surprise, though a hint of satisfaction flickered across her face. "But her last name?" "I thought," Jessica stammered, all pretense of composure gone. Sarah put her bag down on the conference table gently. "My father changed his last name to Parker when he founded the company, but my mother and I kept Miller." Her voice remained calm, but there was strength beneath the softness now. "He believed a business should succeed on its own merits, not family connections. It's a principle I've always respected." She looked directly at Jessica, who seemed to shrink under her gaze. "Which is why I applied for this position based on my own qualifications rather than simply walking in and claiming an office." Robert nodded approvingly. William always valued substance over style. "It's why Parker has thrived for 3 generations while our competitors have disappeared." He glanced meaningfully at Jessica. He wanted Sarah to experience the company from the ground up before taking over as chairwoman. It was written in his will. "I wasn't informed," Jessica said weakly, looking to Thomas for support. The CFO remained silent, his mind clearly calculating this new reality and what it meant for his own position. "That's strange," Robert replied with a frown. "The board was notified last week." "You are still receiving the board communications, aren't you, Jessica?" The question hung in the air like a threat. Lisa Wang coughed lightly, her eyes moving between Jessica and Thomas with new interest. Sarah surveyed the room, taking in each face carefully. "Well," she said, her voice filling the silence with quiet authority, "since my interview appears to be over, perhaps we should discuss my onboarding process." She looked directly at Jessica, whose face had gone from ghostly white to blotchy red. "And it seems I need to evaluate our human resources department as well. I'm curious to understand how my father's company has changed in recent years." As they walked toward the door, Sarah paused and looked back at the executive team, her eyes lingering on Lisa Wang, who had remained thoughtfully silent throughout the exchange. "I'll be scheduling individual meetings with each department head this week. I look forward to learning more about your contributions to my father's legacy." With that, she and Robert left the room, leaving behind a vacuum of power that seemed to suck all the oxygen with them. In their wake, Jessica sank back into her chair, her perfectly manicured hands shaking as she reached for her water glass. Across the table, Thomas Brooks' face had turned to stone, his eyes fixed on the doorway where Sarah had disappeared. Whatever plans they had made were now in serious danger, and they both knew it. That evening, Sarah stood in her father's study at the family home in Greenwich, Connecticut. Her worn leather bag rested on William Miller's massive wooden desk, the same desk where he'd built Parker Industries into a global powerhouse. She ran her fingers over the bag, the only gift from her father she had truly treasured. He had carried it during his early years building the company and had given it to her when she left for college. "Well, Dad," she whispered to the empty room, "I'm back, just like you planned." Their relationship had been complicated. William demanded perfection from everyone, especially his only child. When Sarah had chosen to follow her own path rather than join Parker after Harvard Business School, it had caused a huge argument. "You're turning your back on 3 generations of legacy," he'd shouted, "for what? Some tree-hugging startup that will collapse within a year?" But Sarah had been determined to prove herself on her own merits. GreenPath had been her answer, a company focused on sustainable business practices that she'd built into a $40 million operation. For 7 years it had thrived. Then suddenly everything collapsed when a key investor unexpectedly withdrew funding. In her darkest moment, she'd finally called her father, expecting criticism. Instead, he had surprised her. "Every great business leader faces failure, Sarah. What defines them is what they learn from it and how they rise afterward." It was the closest thing to approval he had ever expressed for her independent path. They had begun rebuilding their relationship, only for William to die suddenly of a heart attack 3 months later. At the funeral, Robert had told her, "Your father was proud of you. He never said it to your face, that wasn't his way, but he told me many times. 2 weeks after the funeral, the will had revealed William's final surprise. Sarah inherited 51% of Parker Industries with the condition that she first work within the company for 1 month without revealing her identity. To truly lead, you must first understand what you're leading, he'd written. Now inside that bag was a USB drive Robert had given her containing evidence her father had compiled about Thomas Brooks' suspected financial wrongdoing, potentially the real reason behind his heart attack. William had been tracking inconsistencies in the company's international accounts, increasingly convinced that his oldest friend and CFO was stealing funds. Tomorrow, Sarah would walk into Parker Industries not as a job applicant but as its majority owner and new chairwoman. As she closed the study door, she whispered a promise, "I'll find the truth, Dad, and I'll protect what you built." The following morning, Parker Industries' executive floor buzzed with nervous energy as Sarah made her way to the boardroom for her first official meeting as chairwoman. She deliberately wore the same blue jacket from yesterday's interview, a silent reminder of how appearances had deceived them. Inside the boardroom, tension filled the air. Jessica Taylor positioned herself prominently near the head of the table, her smile fixed and brittle. "Miss Miller, welcome. I've prepared a comprehensive onboarding package." Nearby, Lisa Wang watched thoughtfully, keeping distance from Jessica's obvious attempt to regain lost ground. Thomas Brooks entered last, his face revealing nothing as he nodded curtly to Sarah. "Ms. Miller." A surprise to us all, but Parker has always valued family tradition. His tone suggested challenge rather than welcome. As the meeting progressed, Sarah observed the company's power dynamics. Thomas had clearly positioned himself as the leader since William's death, with Jessica as his loyal supporter. Robert, though still CEO, had been increasingly pushed aside, explaining his eager support for Sarah's return. Just as the meeting concluded, Jessica cleared her throat. "Before we finish, I think it's important for everyone to understand our new chairwoman's background." She slid a folder across the table toward Sarah. "In the interest of transparency, I've compiled a thorough overview of GreenPath's collapse last year." The room fell silent, a calculated power move to undermine her authority. Thomas leaned back, a satisfied smile playing at the corner of his mouth. Sarah opened the folder, glanced through its contents, then looked up with a surprising smile. "Thank you, Miss Taylor. Transparency is valuable." She closed the folder and addressed the room. "What this report doesn't capture is the most important part, what I learned from the experience." She stood, commanding attention without raising her voice. "GreenPath failed after 7 years of growth. I lost a company I built from nothing, along with my personal investment and temporarily my confidence." Her honesty disarmed Jessica, who had clearly expected defensiveness. "What I gained was far more valuable," Sarah continued, her voice strengthening. "I learned how market perception can shift, and how to recognize warning signs. I learned the importance of diverse investor relationships, and that sustainability must be built into every level of operations." She touched her leather bag. "Most importantly, I learned failure isn't fatal unless you allow it to be. These lessons cost me $40 million, a high price for an education, but one that makes me better equipped to lead Parker through whatever challenges we face." When she finished, several board members nodded appreciatively. Jessica's triumphant expression had faded to confusion. Her attack had backfired, strengthening the position she'd hoped to undermine. Thomas's fingers drummed a restless pattern on the table, his face an expressionless mask. After the meeting, Robert spoke privately with Sarah. "Be careful with Thomas. He's been gathering power since your father died. I've been increasingly pushed out of key financial decisions." Sarah nodded, patting her bag. "Dad suspected as much. I need allies, Robert, people I can trust while I figure out exactly what's happening here. Lisa Wang in talent development has integrity. And Edwin Gray, our legal counsel, he was your father's confidant for 20 years. Robert's expression grew serious. "If Thomas is guilty of what your father suspected, he won't give up power easily." 3 days after becoming chairwoman, Sarah reviewed the contents of Robert's USB drive in her father's office. William had documented a pattern of financial discrepancies pointing to systematic embezzlement totaling millions of dollars over 5 years, each transaction bearing Thomas Brooks' digital fingerprints. Most troubling was an email exchange timestamped hours before her father's heart attack, between Thomas and an offshore shell company linked to someone named Victor Hayes. Her father's note, connected to GreenPath? Check investor records, sent a chill through her. Could there be a link between GreenPath's collapse and Thomas's schemes? Lisa Wang joined her, bringing personnel files Sarah had requested. Your father noticed shifts in company culture 6 months before his death, Lisa revealed when Sarah asked for her perspective. He asked me to document unusual patterns in executive behavior, particularly around international operations. Lisa produced a notebook detailing meeting patterns and financial approvals that suggested Thomas and Jessica were systematically consolidating control while isolating Robert. When Sarah asked why she would take such a risk by sharing this information, Lisa's answer was simple: because Parker was built on integrity. I saw how Jessica treated you in that interview, and how you responded. You lead with values, not ego. That's what Parker needs. Edwin Gray, the elderly legal counsel, interrupted with urgent news. Thomas had scheduled an emergency executive committee meeting tomorrow, excluding Sarah and Robert. He'd filed a proposal to restructure leadership due to concerns about inexperienced management. The document would create a new executive authority, effectively bypassing Sarah's position as chairwoman and Robert's as CEO, a bold power grab using corporate governance to render her majority ownership meaningless in daily operations. The next morning's board meeting crackled with tension as Thomas outlined his proposal with phrases like necessary adaptations to changing market conditions and streamlined decision-making. When he finished, Sarah rose and walked slowly around the table, carrying her father's worn leather bag. Before we vote, I believe it's important to understand what kind of company Parker Industries is and will be under my leadership. She placed the bag on the table. My father founded this company on principles of integrity, innovation, and genuine value creation, not merely profit, but purpose. In recent years, some of those principles appear to have been forgotten. She distributed documents outlining the financial irregularities. These show a pattern of discrepancies in our international divisions, approximately $30 million systematically diverted through shell companies over 5 years. Standing behind Thomas's chair, she continued, what's particularly interesting is the connection to Victor Hayes, who appears to be the owner of these shell companies, the same Victor Hayes who became the majority investor in the firm that suddenly withdrew critical funding from GreenPath last year. Thomas maintained his composure. These are serious allegations based on incomplete information. I'm disappointed you would bring unsubstantiated claims to the board without discussing them privately with me. Sarah merely smiled and returned to her seat, removing one final document from her bag. You're absolutely right, Thomas. Allegations require evidence, which is why I asked Edwin to prepare this formal request for a complete forensic audit of all international accounts, to be conducted by an independent firm selected by non-executive board members. This procedural step would be difficult for any innocent party to object to. After tense deliberation, the senior board member, a retired federal judge who had known William Miller for decades, moved to establish the Special Audit Committee immediately and postpone consideration of the executive restructuring. The motion passed with a comfortable majority, leaving Thomas visibly angry despite his attempted professional demeanor. The following week passed quickly as Sarah strengthened her position within Parker Industries. The Special Audit Committee had confirmed several of the financial discrepancies in William Miller's notes. Thomas maintained his public composure while working behind the scenes to shore up his support among key executives and board members. On a rainy Friday evening, Sarah remained alone in her office, the Manhattan skyline hidden by sheets of water cascading down the windows. The rhythmic drumming of rain created a hypnotic backdrop as she reviewed the latest findings from the forensic accountants. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lisa Wang, found connection. Victor Hayes is Thomas's brother-in-law, used maiden name. Coming up now. The revelation hit Sarah like lightning. If Victor Hayes was related to Thomas, it established a direct personal connection to both the financial irregularities and potentially to GreenPath's collapse. This wasn't just embezzlement, it was a calculated plan to undermine both Parker Industries and her independent success, clearing the path for Thomas to take control following William Miller's death. When Lisa arrived moments later, her normally calm demeanor was charged with urgency. "I've been searching through our vendor approval records," she explained, laying a folder on Sarah's desk. "Hayes Consulting was added to our approved vendor list 3 years ago, signed off personally by Thomas despite being flagged by procurement for insufficient credentials." Even more disturbing, she lowered her voice though they were alone. "I found evidence that Thomas accessed your father's medical records through the company health plan administrator 2 days before his death." The implication hung in the air like poison. Had Thomas known about William's heart condition? Had he deliberately provoked a confrontation knowing the stress might trigger a fatal event? The thought made Sarah's blood run cold. Before she could process this new information, the office door swung open without a knock. Thomas Brooks stood silhouetted against the hallway light, rain darkening the shoulders of his expensive suit. His normally perfect appearance showed signs of strain, tie slightly loosened, stubble on his jaw, hair messy as if he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. His eyes, usually calculating and controlled, now held something darker, a cornered predator's desperate fury. For the first time since she'd known him, Thomas Brooks looked genuinely dangerous. "Working late, Ms. Miller?" he asked, his deep voice carrying an edge beneath its professional veneer. He stepped inside, closing the door with deliberate slowness. "Dedicated to the company already. Just like your father." The casual mention of William felt like a violation coming from Thomas's lips. Sarah felt a surge of protective anger but kept her voice steady. "We were just reviewing some interesting financial patterns, Thomas. Perhaps you'd like to join us? Your insight would be valuable, particularly regarding Hayes Consulting and their remarkable success in securing Parker contracts." Thomas's eyes narrowed at the name, a muscle twitching in his jaw as he realized they had discovered the connection. His gaze flickered to Lisa, then back to Sarah. "I think this discussion would be better conducted privately," he said, the implicit dismissal evident in his tone. When neither woman moved, his facade of civility slipped further. "Miss Wang, I need to speak with the chairwoman alone." "Now." Lisa glanced at Sarah, a question in her eyes. Sarah nodded slightly. "It's all right, Lisa. We'll continue our review in the morning." As Lisa gathered her things, Sarah added meaningfully, "Please make sure Edwin receives those documents we discussed." Lisa nodded her understanding, ensuring the evidence was secured, and departed, closing the door softly behind her. The moment they were alone, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Thomas remained standing, moving to the window where he stared out at the rain-lashed city, his reflection a dark silhouette against the storm outside. "You're very much like your father," he said after a long silence, his voice barely audible above the rain. "The same stubborn commitment to principles. The same inability to see the bigger picture." He turned to face her, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the office. William built something extraordinary, but he never fully understood what was necessary to protect it in today's global market. Some financial flexibility is essential when operating across international boundaries with different regulatory environments. "Is that what you call stealing $30 million? Sarah asked bluntly, standing to face him. "Financial flexibility?" She refused to remain seated while he towered over her, refused to be physically intimidated in her father's office. "Or what about funneling company funds through your brother-in-law's fake consulting firm? Is that just creative accounting?" Thomas's expression hardened, his mask of corporate respectability slipping further. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he growled, moving closer. "Your little sustainable startup was a joke, a vanity project that would never have survived regardless of who invested in it. GreenPath was thriving until Victor Hayes suddenly pulled his investment and spread rumors about our financial stability," Sarah countered, her own anger rising to match his. "You couldn't stand the idea that I might succeed on my own outside of Parker, that I might prove myself worthy of my father's legacy without your influence or control." Something flickered in Thomas's eyes, a momentary hesitation, as if surprised by her directness. Then his expression darkened further. "Your father's legacy," he repeated with a harsh laugh, running a hand through his rain-dampened hair. "You abandoned that legacy when you walked away from this company after graduation. I stayed. I built this company alongside William for 30 years while you were off finding yourself and playing entrepreneur." Years of resentment seeped into his voice, revealing the bitterness that had festered beneath his professional exterior. "I should have been his successor, not his absent daughter who never showed any interest in Parker until she inherited controlling shares." Thunder rumbled outside, a low counterpoint to the tension building in the room. Sarah studied Thomas's face, the man her father had trusted for decades, the man who had stood at her father's side through every major company milestone. She tried to reconcile this angry, bitter figure with the composed executive who had helped build Parker Industries into a global powerhouse. "So you decided to take what you thought you deserved," she said quietly, her calm tone a stark contrast to his growing agitation. "Even if it meant stealing from the company, undermining my independent success," and she paused, forcing herself to articulate the terrible suspicion that had been growing in her mind, "and potentially contributing to my father's death." The accusation hung in the air between them like a live wire. Thomas's face contorted with a complex mixture of emotions, anger, defensiveness, and something that might have been guilt, before hardening quickly into defiance. Outside, the storm intensified, rain lashing against the windows in horizontal sheets driven by the wind. "Your father was investigating the international accounts," he admitted finally, pacing like a caged animal. "He found some discrepancies and confronted me about them the night he died." His voice wavered slightly, the first crack in his composure. "I never touched him. His heart gave out during our argument, a medical condition he'd been hiding from everyone, including you." The confirmation struck Sarah like a physical blow. Her father had died while confronting his closest friend about a betrayal so profound it defied comprehension. She steadied herself against the desk, determined not to show weakness despite the pain lancing through her heart. "So you just left him there," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You walked away and left him dying on the floor of this office." "I called for help," Thomas snapped, genuine distress breaking through his controlled exterior for a moment. He looked almost haunted. But it was too late. The paramedics said he was already gone when they arrived. He ran both hands through his hair, momentarily revealing the human beneath the corporate predator. "I never wanted William dead. Whatever you think of me, you have to believe that. He was my friend for 40 years. And yet you betrayed him," Sarah responded, her voice strengthening. "You betrayed everything he built, everything he stood for." Thomas's vulnerability vanished as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by cold calculation. "Listen to me carefully," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper as he leaned closer. "You have some documents and suspicions, but nothing conclusive enough for criminal charges. The board may be temporarily swayed by your performance, but half of them still see you as William's inexperienced daughter playing at business." He straightened his tie, visibly pulling himself back together, reassuming the mantle of corporate authority that had served him so well. "Walk away now, Sarah. Take your inheritance and leave Parker to those who understand how to run it. Otherwise, this gets ugly in ways you can't imagine." The threat hung in the air between them, but instead of intimidation, Sarah felt a strange calm settling over her. This was the moment she had been preparing for since finding her father's notes, the confrontation that would either vindicate or invalidate everything he had suspected about his oldest friend. With deliberate movements, she reached down and pressed a small button on her father's old leather bag, which had been sitting open on her desk throughout their conversation. A small red light stopped blinking. "That's where you're wrong again, Thomas," she said with quiet confidence. "This entire conversation has been recorded, your admission about my father's death, the financial wrongdoing, the deliberate sabotage of Greenpath. All of it documented and witnessed." For a split second, Thomas's face went completely blank, processing the implication. Then his eyes widened in genuine shock, followed by a flash of fear that he quickly tried to mask with indignation. "You can't, that's illegal," he sputtered, his composure finally shattering completely. "Actually, New York is a one-party consent state for recordings," Sarah corrected him calmly. "Something my father taught me years ago. One of many lessons I took to heart." As if on cue, the office door opened to reveal FBI Special Agent Diana Rodriguez, a tall woman with a stern expression and perfect posture that spoke of military background before joining the bureau. Behind her stood Edwin Gray, his elderly face set in lines of grim satisfaction, and two uniformed officers whose hands rested casually near their holsters. "Thomas Brooks," Agent Rodriguez announced formally, her voice clear and authoritative, "you're under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. Additional charges may be forthcoming as our investigation continues." She nodded respectfully to Sarah before proceeding to read Thomas his rights. As the officers moved forward with handcuffs, Thomas stood frozen, his face cycling through shock, fury, and finally a strange resignation as he realized the extent of the trap he had walked into. As the cold metal of the handcuffs closed around his wrists, he looked at Sarah with a mixture of hatred and something almost like respect. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low and threatening despite his compromised position. "You have no idea what you're doing. Parker Industries needs someone who understands how the real world works, not an idealist with her head in the clouds." Sarah watched calmly as he was led toward the door, feeling a complex mixture of vindication and sadness. This man had been her father's right hand for decades, had helped build the company she was now tasked with saving. There was tragedy in his fall, even if it was entirely of his own making. "Actually, Thomas," she said quietly as he reached the threshold, "I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm honoring my father's legacy, all of it, including his belief in justice and accountability." For just a moment, something flickered across Thomas's face, perhaps recognition of the truth in her words, or simply the final realization that he had truly lost. Then the moment passed, and he was led away between the officers, his tall frame somehow diminished by the circumstances. As the door closed behind them, Sarah turned to the rain-streaked windows, the storm beginning to subside. The city lights blurred through the water like distant stars coming into focus. In the reflection of the glass, she could almost see her father standing behind her, his stern face softened with something like pride. She reached out to touch her father's worn leather bag, the unassuming vessel that had carried the evidence to bring down his betrayer. It represented everything Parker Industries should be, not flashy or showy, but solid, reliable, and containing true value within. "We did it, Dad," she whispered to the empty office. "We protected what matters." Outside, the rain began to ease, the first hints of clearing sky visible between the clouds. A new day was coming for Parker Industries, one built on the foundations William Miller had established but looking toward a future he might never have imagined. Sarah would guide the company into that future, carrying his principles forward while adding her own vision. The old leather bag would remain by her side, a constant reminder that true worth is never found on the surface.